Hi, everyone, and thank you for staying for this panel. I'm really excited to be talking about that, and we'll have to excuse Summer. He was going to join us in the panel today, but he's sick, so he's not going to be able to join the discussion today. I hope he's watching online. So here we have Taylor, Medha, and Raine. I let them present themselves first, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Yeah, hi, I'm Taylor. I am the founder and CEO of MyCrypto. MyCrypto is a wallet, and it allows people to hopefully easily, interact with the Ethereum ecosystem. And I've been in this space developing and building products for just over 3 years, and I've been interested in cryptocurrency and watching the entire ecosystem evolve since about late 2013.
Hi everyone, I'm Medha Kothari. So I'm a developer at heart. I'm finishing up my computer science degree at UC Berkeley, California. My area of expertise is in enterprise blockchain. So I lead blockchain at Berkeley's consulting division. But also right now I'm going to be working at a cool startup that's doing research into stablecoins. And also I'm the founder of She256, which is doing exactly what this panel is talking about, trying to break down barriers of entry to the space and increase diversity.
I'm Raine Revere. I'm an engineer and a therapist, and I currently work on designing sense-making systems of the future.
Well, thank you very much for your introductions. I feel like diversity is not a very recent topic. It's actually a pretty old topic that we've seen discussed in very different contexts. Still, I think it's very necessary to contextualize it here. So how will you define diversity? Maybe you can start here and go the direction.
So I think that a lot of times when you hear the word diversity, or you see a panel like this, or you see a tweet or a little nugget, a lot of times people are like, yeah, that's probably a good thing. Or they have the opposite reaction, which is like, why do we need this? Or screw you, or you should be hiring based on merit only. What the heck? Why are you? All of these arguments. And I think that fundamentally, when we're building products, when we're building ecosystems, when we're building communities, regardless of what we're doing, having different perspectives is mandatory. Otherwise, you are solely building something for yourself rather than the larger world. And if we want to have an impact on the greater world and be really revolutionary, you have to have a variety of perspectives that can come together to create a more valuable product or a more valuable whatever it is. And I think that gets lost in a lot of the conversations. We talk a lot about metrics, we talk a lot about maybe specific areas of diversity, like including more women in tech and things like that. But the reality is that it's less about the numbers or more women or more X or more Y. It's more about your company, your team, your community is going to be more valuable the more diverse the perspectives and the backgrounds are, so that the collective knowledge and the collective wisdom elevates the final product to be something that's more remarkable than what just I could produce or just you could produce.
Yep.
Yeah, I completely agree with Taylor here. So I think diversity is a lot of things. Usually when we think of diversity, people think race, gender, socioeconomic status, sexual preference, all of that. And that's definitely all diversity. But I think more than that, it contributes to a person's experience and background, and it kind of affects the way they see the world and how they want to, be a part of it, right? So I think truly diversity is experience and an environment that allows people to be accepted regardless of their differences. So I think the reason why diversity is important in especially the blockchain space, I think, is just like impact. So there's a lot of research out there that says having a diverse team or a set of co-founders makes a company a lot more successful, a lot more productive. That's definitely true. But even more than that, I think for the blockchain space, it's a necessity. So like Taylor said, we all think about blockchain as a future future, right? I think everyone in this room, we think of blockchains as the future for our government, our financial systems, everything, right? And that's supposed to impact billions of people. So if we want to impact all those people, we have to make sure that the people building these systems are representative of the world's global diverse population. We want to make sure that, like for example, yesterday, I think Laura in her talk mentioned that the biases of creators are kind of inherited by the technology that they create. So if we want to make fair and just equitable systems on blockchains, we have to make sure that the builders developing these things are kind of ingraining their experience and their background into these systems.
I'm curious how you all define diversity. I won't be able to find out right now, but I think diversity is the use of the word says a lot, like it's a signifier. Like who talks about diversity, who uses that word and who doesn't, I think is actually interesting. And, I think there's a sort of progressive culture that incentivizes awareness of these things, but you can also just avoid, like as long as you don't say the wrong thing, you're kind of okay, you're kind of in the clear. So how we, like when we talk about diversity, what conversation is happening? Like what conversation is that a part of? And I think it in one way or another, it goes back to who's behind the systems that are being built, who is using the systems that are being built, and how are we relating to them, and how do we care about those people, which is really confusing in the decentralized web where privacy and anonymity are like good things, and we're trying to create systems where centralization can't like secure power in the way it has before. It's confusing for me as well. Like, how do we reconcile the need for anonymity and these sort of de-identifying processes with things like diversity and inclusivity that actually want to name all of the people and all of the identities and all the voices in the room? Because if you don't do that, then there's just a lot of automatic cultural processes happening, and you're gonna get some kind of output that maybe you didn't want.
Actually, I want to elaborate on neutrality and anonymous and pseudonymous identities later, but I want to elaborate more because you've been talking about the importance of diversity. But maybe we can share what are the risks of ignoring diversity, especially building the decentralized web.
Mm-hmm. So we know that like hires like. So if you are, it doesn't matter who you are, if I assign every single one of you in this room to hire someone that will do something for you, be your assistant or take some set of work off of your plate, you are most likely going to hire someone with the same gender, with the same race, with the same socioeconomic background, with the same skill sets, with the same everything. And especially in a space like the blockchain space or the larger like STEM space where you do have this inherent lack of diversity for any number of reasons, you can kind of fall into this self-fulfilling prophecy or this rabbit hole where you can't climb out of it because all the people that are currently in the system are pretty much, in this one little cookie cutter shape, and they're hiring other people in the same cookie cutter shape, and then nobody outside of that cookie cutter feels welcome in the community or feels welcome within your company or feels welcome in whatever. And then the final sort of outcome of this, especially in like a company structure, is that you have a company of 10 or 20 or 50 young, privileged white males, and they are building products for other young, privileged white males. And no matter how much they talk about wanting to change the world and bank the unbanked and empower the people, it's hard to do that when you're a privileged, you come from a privileged background and that's all you know. And so I think that when you ignore those things, if you're not aware of them, it's very easy to fall into destructive patterns. And especially if we aren't hyper aware of it now, so early in the development of this community and this space, we have really no chance of not following the people who've come before us, and namely, you know, the sort of the Silicon Valley, you know, the stereotypes, you know, are based on reality, and that sort of culture, you know, we don't want to be there. I think we can agree. If we do want to just copy Silicon Valley, then I think we have a larger discussion to be had.
Yeah.
Can I say something? I
Yeah.
appreciate you starting that with like hires like, and so the opposite of that is similarity is difference, and so I think that's important. Is how are we relating to difference, and how are we talking about difference? And it's not the fault of the ideas and the ideals and the systems that are being put forth as superior to ones of the past. That those have those merits and advantages, and how do those systems include difference? So no matter how good a system is, you know, maybe you've come up with a way to allow better voting, or all of the things that have been talked about the last couple of days, and how does that system account for differences in values? Because differences in life experience is connected to differences in values. And ultimately that's like kind of the juicy stuff of diversity. It's not just what's on the outside, but the fact is what's on the outside is part of who we are in the world, and how we're seen and perceived, and what kinds of things come to us.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I think it just all boils down to like market research, right? So if you're creating a product or trying to make an impact on the world, how are you supposed to do that if you only have this one experience? You want to include everyone's experiences, right? You don't want to be stuck in this echo chamber where everyone you surround yourself with or you hire has the same background and views as you. And those might not be bad views, right? But it's not a representation of everyone's views. So I think that's why it's super important to make sure you start those conversations early on, because I think it's like founders' duties, right, to value a culture that is based on inclusivity. And if you don't do that, then you'll see like the tech industry, which has been around for like 3-4 decades now, is really bad. The ratio is getting worse and worse every year, regardless of how many groups there are trying to get more women and other diverse groups back into the space. They're stuck in this kind of vicious cycle where, like you were saying, it's hard for people to even want to get exposed to something where they already feel like they have to go through like a hurdle just to get noticed, So it's important to do this right now when blockchain is still in its infancy, and we can really make a strong impact now that can, forever change the pipeline 5-10 years down the road.
I agree with what you guys shared, but at the same time, I feel like all what going against the philosophy of Silicon Valley and like inclusivity, trying to hire and get different contributors with different backgrounds. Like, we don't care that much, at least like from a nature standpoint, I don't care that much about titles anymore. I don't care about even like the names. I see like contribute like your GitHub profile, your thoughts on Twitter and so on. And we have like remote jobs, so it's like we have a bigger talent pool than other more traditional companies. So it feels like, at least in terms of what we signal, that the Web3 is kind of diverse. But do you think the Web3 today is a diverse community?
Does anyone want to take that one?
I feel like that's definitely a tough question. It also depends on what you define and what you prioritize as your version of diversity, right? But I think it all comes down to whether access to the space is equitable. And I would say it is to an extent, but the thing is, if not everyone is exposed to the same extent, then how can you say it's equal, right? So I think people like to say that the blockchain space in general is like super meritocratic. Like, oh, you can hide behind a screen, and if you have the skills, you can push to like GitHub. You can make, you can make an impact regardless of who you are. People don't look at your face. But I don't think that's true just because people's backgrounds are so different, right? Like, if from a young age you aren't exposed to things like coding or like technology or anything like that, then that's not gonna kind of follow through when it comes to you trying to get into a pipeline of like recruitment. So I think the way we have to mitigate this is through education. I think we should really, really make these opportunities and access to education equitable so that everyone can be involved and has the choice to be involved in this field if they want to.
Yeah, I think there's it needs to be said that it does take work. That it's actually going to take work. It's going to be harder to go against to go outside the shortest path towards finding talent, creating a team, creating the culture of a team, and it's important for that to happen. And there's a kind of a myth of neutrality that if you just are open to everybody, then you're going to get diversity, that it's going to happen. And that's not actually what happens. What happens is that existing systems, legacy cultural systems, are operating and procedurally selecting the kinds of people and experiences that are produced. So you're really, by saying we're just open and neutral, you're actually saying, I'm opting out of choosing. I'm not voting, so I'm going to allow cultural norms to vote, and I'm going to allow biases that are inherent in the system. So I think it's important to take an active stance and to have a shift in attitude, like I myself did, that like, oh, it's not enough to just be a nice person. Like, that is great when you're just interacting with someone or at work, but that we're talking about larger systems that are complicated and involve power that affects people's decisions.
Yeah, and I just want to build on that a little bit and make it maybe a little bit more tangible. So I run a company. I hire people. I also empower people that I've hired to hire people that are underneath them. And we had one team member where everyone that came into our sort of larger circle, whether that was outside contributors on GitHub, whether that was people that had a question, or whether that was people that he was actively recruiting and hiring, if they had the same sort of everything as him, and I'm not talking about skin color or age specifically, but the same sort of philosophy and way of looking at things, then he was on board with them. And if they didn't, then he wasn't. And he was completely unaware of this fact, right? He would, unintentionally push people away that were trying to contribute because he couldn't relate to them on a social or a cultural level. And I could see this. I could watch this happening again and again, but he was unaware of this. And I think that for everyone in this room, it's very easy to just assume that because you don't see color, or you're not racist, or you're not sexist, or you're not ageist, or you have a mom or a sister or whatever, BS line you want to throw out there as to why you're not doing wrong, you really do need to be hyper aware of your actions and your responses and your hiring practices and who you're including in your processes. And ask yourself, if you're not meshing well with someone, if you're not interested in someone, ask yourself the hard question, which is, why am I not as into this person as that person? Is it because of their skills? Is it because of their actual talents? Or is it because I don't have the ability to relate to them because they have a different background than me? And if the answer is they're older than me and so we can't relate as well, then you need to put the effort into making that relationship work, not say, hey, sorry, you're not a good culture fit. That's not a good excuse to not including someone in your community or in your team. You have to put the work in, just like any relationship that you have. And I would really urge everyone watching online and everyone here to start asking yourself that question. When you don't like someone, when you choose not to hire someone, why is that? And try to be really honest with yourself, because it's quite easy to be like, oh yeah, he's not technical enough, or she doesn't have the experience necessary. But more often than not, this whole culture fit is the excuse for not hiring today. And I think that it's quite blasphemous, to be honest.
But then it feels like then cultural fit is not that important. I mean, because like from a hiring or recruiting standpoint, I think like there's a need of being able, I'm not saying that you have to socialize with your team, but you have to be able to work together with your team.
Right. And
so
culture is insanely important. We have a remote team. Building that culture has been one of the biggest struggles and the things that I put the most time and effort in over the past years, right? Having good culture makes a world of difference. But you can build that culture, and you have to build that culture. You have to work at that culture regardless of like the dynamics of your team. So even if you have everyone that naturally gets along for whatever reason, you still have to work at the culture. And if you have people that don't naturally get along with each other, guess what? You have to build that culture, and it may be a little bit more difficult. And I think that's the difference, is whether you're excluding someone very early on because they're not the culture fit, rather than understanding that the culture is everyone coming together and you're working at that. And both the individuals on the team need to work at it. The people that are, overseeing or managing or running the whole damn company, have to work at it. And the culture is what created created when these people come together. The culture is not the fact that two people happen to get along.
Yeah, and like to add to that point, I think, culture fit is super important, but it's also the founder and the company, the teams. It's in their it's like in their duty to kind of outline a really important culture from the beginning, right? So, for example, for me, when I started She 256 with two of my friends, we were obviously already friends, and then we expanded a little bit. We had like 5 to 10 members. We were all also friends, so we already got along. But then now that we're really scaling and we're hiring new people, we're getting to that point where now we have to realize, like, okay, we're not all friends anymore yet. We have to really, really make culture at the forefront of our meetings, whenever we make any decisions, whenever we do any sort of team events or any sort of pushing initiatives. We have to make sure everything falls within our culture. So setting that is so important, because that also affects who you're hiring, right? So when you say someone's not a culture fit, so we're not hiring them, what does that culture mean? And what are those values that you are saying are so important that this person doesn't kind of fall into those categories?
Actually, I want to change the question for you, because we're running short on time.
Yeah.
One of the main problems of recruiting a diverse Web3 is that the current community and the current talent pool is not diverse. So what actions can we take today to attract a more diverse community that can contribute to the Web3 ecosystem?
I don't know. I'm not convinced that most people want to attract more diverse community yet. I don't think the conversations have gone deep enough or really made their way into people's view of the world.
Yeah, for me, I think there's 2 things you can do for sure. So I call the first one breadth first, because I think that to attract a bigger diverse pool, so that you can even have an applicant pool that has diversity already inbuilt that you can choose from, you have to start from the beginning. So something like really making sure education is important. So starting from a young age, trying to teach younger people about the blockchain space or whatever you're interested in, and getting them involved from the beginning so that they're exposed to it when they are choosing their career. But I think more than that, we need to focus on some short-term things, because that is a very long-term goal that takes 5-10 years minimum to see the outcome of those type of efforts. So short-term is depth first. So I think everyone should really, really go into mentorship. So for someone who's already in the space, it's up to you to find someone who you think has a lot of potential or is showing interest in the space, even if they're not in the space already, but you see that they're actively interested and you see that they might become, like the next, co-founder, or next, the next big thing. It's up to you to really spend the time mentoring them. And I think that sort of long, sustainable impact on one person is so exponential. Like if you start doing that, then that type of culture again is built into the field, and people will kind of pay that forward. So I think, you kind of have to have both of those two-pronged approaches, so that again, you're changing the space while it's happening and while it's like being built right now, but you're also making it sustainable long term, so that younger people going into the space are also exposed.
Well, we run out of time. I want to summarize this panel. Thank you very much for all your contributions. I think one important idea of the panel is that I think most of the times we relate to diversity because of gender, race, age. We put variables to it. And as you've seen, we haven't talked about variables at all. We talk about like diversity as a super big spectrum. And that's what we should take into account when recruiting for Web3 and when building for Web3 as well. So thank you very much for our panelists, and yeah, that was
Thank you.
Thank you.